All right, so we're recording now. And I'm going to share my screen. All right, so this Rhino model I have open here is actually a model of the cabin I worked on when I took this class several years ago. And I thought it would be a good model to share with you and use as a example for creating some diagrams. So as you guys are seeing right now, my model's located over here, and I have a couple of Make 2D line drawings that I've created. And I'm going to use these to create some diagrams. So there's a couple of diagrams that I'm thinking about creating. For example, if this were my project. And some of those diagrams that I'd like to create are a structural diagram. So I'll just write them down on the page here so you guys can see what I'm thinking about. So a structural diagram. And I'm thinking about also creating a diagram that talks about sort of what's going on in the interior, some built-in furniture diagram. So I'm going to call it just a furniture diagram. Okay, so these are the diagrams that I'm hoping to create. So step one, as you can see, is what I've done here is I've created just a simple Make 2D that is the isometric view of the cabin here. And what I'm hoping to do is use that Make 2D, this top one over here, as a background or a base for these diagrams that I'm creating. So what I've done to create the structural diagram, and it's not a complete diagram yet, is I've turned off all of my layers except for anything that was structural related. So anything that was an I-beam, a foundation, anything that was cross bracing, I kept those layers turned on. So for example, I'll go here. I ended up turning off mostly everything within this model. And let's see here. Let's go this layer. So a very bare bones view of what the structure is. And I made that 2D as its own separate element over here. So that is going to count as my structural diagram. Now I'm going to go ahead and create what would be my my furniture diagram. So I'm actually going to turn off a lot of these elements again. So I'm going to turn off the roof. Let's turn off the siding, cross bracing. I'm going to basically turn off everything except for maybe some of the interior walls. Because I want this diagram to really just focus on these elements. So what's going on in here is that this building or this cabin has built-in furniture, and this bed actually rotates up and closes into this frame over here. So I kind of want to create a diagram that talks about that. So I'm just going to continue turning some things off. For this diagram, I'm thinking it might be nice to keep some of the walls in the background. And I might just go and hide some of these walls that are blocking my view. So I'm just going to select hide. This is my glass layer. I can just turn that layer off, and I will hide this layer. Well, let's see, what else should we turn off? I'll turn off the railing. And okay, so I think this should be sufficient for that diagram. So I'm just going to go ahead and do make 2D again. Let's see here. There it is. Sorry, your faces were blocking the menu. Okay, we'll hit OK. All right, so now we have here, if we go back to our top view, we have all of these make 2D elements. So I'm actually going to organize these. Let's see here. So this is, let's do it by the stairs. I'm going to pick a point on the stairs here and just align it here by using my smart track. And I'll just place it there. So now we have each of these portions of the building. And we've created these separate make 2D portions. Now I'm going to bring these into Illustrator and assign them some line weights and add some arrows and stuff like that. But what I've done here, as I've explained before, is I've created an overall make 2D of the model because I'm going to use this as the basic background for each of these make 2D items. So this is gonna, my vision here when I'm creating these diagrams is that this is gonna serve as a very light background. So everything in this make 2D will have a light line weight, and I'm going to overlay each of these make 2Ds on top with a heavier line weight so that the diagram reads how I want to. I want the, for example, the structural diagram, I want the structure to really pop out. So let's see how we can do this. I'm going to export these as different make 2D files. So we'll call this, and we're going to export to Illustrator. I'll call this one diagram background. So for these diagrams, scale actually does not matter for a diagram. So I'm actually not going to select the model scale. I'm just going to do snapshot of current view. That would be completely fine for the purpose of creating these diagrams. So I'm going to hit OK. And I'm going to do this one separately. Structural diagram. And last but not least, we'll do the furniture diagram. Okay, so I'm gonna open Illustrator now. And while that's opening up, I'll ask if anyone has any questions so far. All right, I'll take the silence as a no. Okay, so let me share my screen now that Illustrator's open. Okay, so here we see the diagram, just the basis here that I'm going to use. And I'm going to open my rulers right now. I'm going to go to show rulers just to see what size paper I'm working with. Right now we're working in inches, so we're working with a traditional 11 by 17 piece of paper, which should be fine. Let's think about our final boards. They're going to be 2 foot by 2 foot boards. So if I scale this drawing up, this diagram to fit the page, and remember, scale doesn't really matter because this is just a diagram, just as long as it's in scale with itself. This drawing, because it's on an 11 by 17 piece of paper, if we think about translating this piece of paper to our 2 by 2 board, this is how big it will be on that board. So this is pretty large. So the larger the better, because we can always shrink it down when we bring it to the final board. So I am going to organize my layers right now. First, I'll start by creating some layer organization. So we'll call this the background lines. And I'm actually gonna select all of these layers and move them into this background lines layer. So because I'm just using this as a background right now, I'm going to select actually all of these lines, all these layers. So I'm going to select all of them, and I'm going to give them some pretty light line weights. So so light that they're actually almost gray, or they are gray, and we'll change that to 0.5. So when I unselect all of these, we are left with just this very light line weights right here. Now I'm going to open my structural diagram. And I'm going to copy and paste that over. So I can select all those items, hover them, and then hover over the other tab and bring them in. And right now, all of those lines are currently located in this visible scene silhouette layer. Actually, let me think of a better way to do this. Actually, this should be fine. I'm going to create a new layer, and I'll call this my structural lines. So right now, everything in this, let's say we want to move these lines over to my structural lines layer. So all I need to do is select those lines here in the Illustrator artboard. And you'll see here that there are elements selected within that layer. If I click this little square right here, click, hold, and drag, I can move it just by dragging it into the structural lines layer. So now you'll see when I select these, this layer is highlighted, and that means these items are within that layer. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to basically scale this up so that it is in line with this background that I've created. So just nudging them into the correct location. And there we go. So now we see that we have this background in this background layer here, and we have the structural layer. And by doing that right now, what I've done is essentially create a structural diagram, but there's this background of the building behind it, which what it's doing for the diagram is it's giving the diagram some context and relationship to the rest of the building. So I can go now and just assign these a black line weight. And if I wanted to, I could make that, let's make that 1.5, make that a little darker. And now we can say that this is a structural diagram because it's highlighting all the structural elements of the building here, but also showing some context. So the structural beams alone as a line weight would be fine, but it's always helpful to kind of show, other things that are happening within the diagram as well. So let's turn that off. And I'll do a similar one for the furniture diagram. So same process, I'm just gonna hover, bring these over, drop them in. And I'll create a new layer. And we need to scale that up. So you have to kind of nudge them a little bit until they align. All right, we'll say that's good enough for now. And now similarly, I can give black line weights to all of those lines. And now we have what's the sort of beginning of a diagram here that sort of talks about what's going on the interior of the building. Personally, I think for this diagram, perhaps the roof lines become a little bit distracting. So if I wanted to, I can go back a couple steps and remove the roof from the Make 2D just to make this diagram a little bit more clear. But for the sake of the demo and for time here, I'm not going to do that currently. And if we wanted to, maybe I could just turn off the background lines, and this could also just live by itself as its own diagram. But as I mentioned before, these are beds that sort of fold in and out. You're also more than welcome to play with your pens and your different tools here. For example, let's maybe pick a blue color here, and I can draw perhaps an arrow such as this. And I'll remove the fill. So I'll remove the fill on that line, and I can apply a stroke to it to give it, so if I go under my strokes here, I can give that line an arrowhead. And that arrow now describes the action of this bed and that it folds open and closed. Maybe I'll make that larger, make the line weight heavier, and then I have to reduce the arrowhead size. I can copy that over to this one too. So yeah. So that's creating some diagrams using the Make 2D. Do you guys have any questions about that?
No question.
No questions? Okay. All right, I'm gonna stop the recording.